One more minute, make sure you've got your coffee refilled, and we'll get started here shortly.
Okay, well, as Shelby said, I hope everybody had a chance to get a quick coffee refill. I've stopped seeing a lot of alerts popping up on my screen, so it looks like we have most folks there. So we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, good morning. Happiest of Fridays to everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope your families are healthy and sane. It's obviously some unique and trying times, and I think we're all getting through this together. We're very, very excited about today's agenda. Obviously, wish we were in person, but we think we have a great setup, and we would make the best of it in a virtual sense. I do appreciate everybody's patience with technology. I don't know if it's been like this for everybody else, but I've had Zoom meetings and Teams meetings and GoTo meetings and WebExes, and we're figuring it all out. And I know that if I run into any problems, I'm just going to go ask my kids. I don't know at what point in life that I turn into my dad, but if I have struggle with technology, I'm just going to go grab one of my kids to come fix it. And so maybe maybe some of you are in that boat today too. A few just quick words of thanks. I know there have been a lot of people involved in making this happen. Our regional data lead steering committee, our numerous presenters, Matt Cohen and multiple ODE staff who have been involved in putting this together. So one, thank you for all the work that you've put into to making this happen. A few quick reminders. One is that if keep your microphones muted. If you're running into bandwidth issues, you may want to consider turning off your own video feed. I'm sure we'll get those reminders throughout the day. The sessions are recorded, so if you miss something, those sessions will be available, and all the slides and meeting materials are available in your calendar invites, and they're found on the RTL Google Drive. So we'll make sure that if you miss something or having technology issues, everything will be available. I encourage you to use the chat box feature. We've got staff that are monitoring the chat, and I know that even in the many meetings we've had over the past couple of weeks and board meetings and various things, is that oftentimes there's some really good conversation happening in that chat. So I encourage you to use that. And again, ODE staff, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the day. So with that, I'm going to stop talking because we've got some great things going on and some special guests. We're very, very excited that State Superintendent Paul De Maria is here to kick us off with some opening remarks. His schedule is always very, very busy, and just having him here is a key indication of just how much we value this work and think that the supports that are coming out of our network are of value to Ohio's educators. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paulo.
Great, thanks, Chris. Again, Chris is right on the money. I love this work because I think we see the continuing need, and I'll emphasize the fact, even in particular right now, for really continuing to improve both the system's ability and individual people, whether they're administrators or teachers, to be able to not only understand data and what it says, but then to use that data in ways that inform practice. And so, since we started the work and developing regional data leads and putting this network together, I've been so excited because I've heard so many examples and great feedback from people who have said, hey, I got some great help, and it's really making a difference for what's happening in school, what's happening in our district, or my own particular practice. And so I so very much appreciate you all taking the time out of your schedules to spend a day together, networking, sharing ideas, learning from us, learning from each other, talking about what the work holds for us as we look forward. And I think you've got an exciting agenda ahead of you. And I also just thank you for your day-to-day work and commitment. This is one of the parts of what we do in Ohio that really exemplifies the idea of partnership as it's expressed in the strategic plan. And I love that, because we know, we're honest with ourselves at the Department of Education, that, our reach can only go so far. And frankly, we're not always the most credible resource on any number of issues. And so the fact that we're partnering with ESCs, with all of you, with the SSTs, and with others to really deploy an infrastructure that's here to help support the continuous improvement activities of the schools and districts. Because ultimately, I have increasingly become a believer that having good continuous improvement processes in place, processes that allow you to identify problems, understand root causes, develop strategies to address those, and then create that plan, do, study, act cycle where you're trying things, you're collecting data about it, you're looking at the data, trying to figure out whether it's having the impact that you had hoped. And then if not, tweaking and fine tuning, or if it is, then emphasizing and going more aggressively. That's really what leads to schools improving and being in that continuous sense of how do we keep getting better and better all the time in the interest of the educational experience and the impacts on our students. So I salute you for the work that you do and the role you play in driving that agenda. I also, think that we're all sitting here, I don't know when this event was planned, but my sense was if it was several months ago, we had no idea that we'd be sitting here today under the particular circumstances in which we're operating. The proverbial wrench has been thrown into the works. Everything's been disrupted. The education community has really stepped up, and I'm so proud and so amazed at all the great things that have happened. But we still know it's less than ideal, and we're facing now the 2021 school year where we're hopeful that things will look different than they did during the building closure period, but we're still not entirely sure how it's going to look. We know it's going to be different. We know coronavirus is still going to be with us. We know there are increasing fiscal constraints that are facing the education community. But in that can-do spirit that we have, we're going to figure it out, and we're going to deliver as quality a product as we can moving forward, and continue to look for that day when we figure out what the new normal is and how do we settle into those patterns. One of the keys to all that, one of the keys is all the health and safety requirements. And John Richard on our team is working closely with the Department of Health and school nurses and others and all the associations on working that out. But the other key thing is going to be figuring out where students are and how do we meet them where they are. And that's going to require people to leverage sources of data that they have locally. We don't have state level data. And so we're going to have to, manage through that and figure out creative ways to both use, previously available local level data, as well as what are the ways to create new information and new understanding about where students are, so that can inform how this restart and the reopening of school and addressing the needs of students from the point where they are. We have to assume there's going to be a lot more variability than there has been, at the start of the year in the past. And this is where you all come into the mix, because it's helping districts and schools identify what data do you have, what data could you likely generate, how does that inform your practice? And then all of us are continually on the lookout for how do we do a better job, whether that's the department, whether it's you all, whether it's your respective organizations, and how do we continue to answer the questions that come up, provide the resources that people may need, provide the tools that people may need, in the interest of supporting this kind of activity across the enterprise. So, again, you've got some exciting sessions planned for today. I think we value so much your contribution. And I think what's also important is to emphasize, I value the feedback we get from you, because a lot of times, people look at the state agency and they see us as sort of a unidirectional communicator. And while it appears to be that way from time to time, I and others in the organization have really tried to impose that the value of hearing back, getting feedback from practitioners. What are you picking up from the people you're working from? What do you see as the needs? What do you see as the confusion that might be being caused? What do you see as the things people like and that are particularly helpful and that they need more of? that feedback is so important. And so the 130 participants on this webinar today, I hope you see yourselves as a source of important information to us, so that as you go about your work, as you observe what's happening, as you observe the needs of the people that you are working directly with, you help us understand how we can be better as well. Because I think that actually is such an important part of the partnership principle. Because if you can help us to get better, then we can support you in doing better work, and that the energy and momentum around that combination platter becomes so incredibly powerful. So again, I'll just wrap up briefly by saying thank you so much for the work you do, for taking the time out of your schedules to be here today, for providing important information back to us, for being partners with us in promoting good data use practices and the robust use of data in informing changes in adult behavior, changes in practices, and ultimately changes and student outcomes, because together we all work towards that ultimate goal, which is helping every student be successful and creating a trajectory for them not only to be successful in their academic pursuits, but in their social emotional learning, and ultimately in whatever they choose as their path in life. So thanks so very, very much. Keep up the great work you're doing each and every day. Keep up the feedback that you provide to us and pushing us to be our best, because together we're going to make a difference. Thanks.
Thanks, Paulo. So for the next few minutes, we want to give a quick update on another exciting development. I think one of the things that the department has committed to over the year is to continue to seek out additional opportunities, in particular grant opportunities, to leverage the work of our network. I think it's safe to say that there's increasing sort of national attention on what our group is putting together and sort of the power of this network. So one of those opportunities was the most recent federal state longitudinal data systems grant. For those of you who are familiar with this grant program, it's sort of a long-standing grant program that the feds have done over the years, and we've received a few of these over the past decade or so that has largely built up our longitudinal data system, but we have most recently received another round of that, and the work that the network is doing is a key piece of that, and so we're very, very excited to talk through some of the elements of that grant and what it means. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to some other members of our team, both Dr. Heather Boughton, who's the Director of Office of Research Evaluation and Advanced Analytics. It's such a long office name, I had to read it off the screen. But also Ali D'Angelo, who is our Executive Director in our Center for Performance and Impact. And hopefully you've all had a chance to meet them and work with them before. But Heather is going to start us off and talk a little bit more about the SLDS grant.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. I just want to start by echoing Paulo and Chris's sentiments that I'm really excited and pleased to be here with you this morning, sharing a little bit about the work that we're doing at the state level that is very much connected to what you are doing with your local districts. And there's a lot of opportunities here and synergies here, and I'm really excited to share a little bit about this grant with you. As Chris said, we're always kind of looking for opportunities to support this priority that Paulo talked about, the priority of using data in continuous improvement efforts. And so the statewide longitudinal data systems grant program was one such opportunity that as we saw this come out from the feds, we sort of immediately recognized an opportunity here. And as Chris said, there have been a number of statewide longitudinal data system grants over the years. For those of you who know about this program, historically, those grants were designed to help states build up data systems, and Ohio's benefited from a number of those grants. But of late, the U.S. Department of Education has shifted the focus of the grant program to essentially send the message that, we've spent a number of years building up the data systems. We need to use these systems for continuous improvement and for improving student outcomes. And so the nature of the SLDS grant program has shifted accordingly. so that we're really starting to dig into the wealth of information that we have and build upon the good work, the good groundwork that we've been laying over the years. And so, Shelby, you can go ahead and skip to the next slide. Thank you. So we saw this grant opportunity, and we saw it as an opportunity to support the continuous improvement efforts that Paulo referenced, and really wanted specifically to think about how we could create tools, generate new data, and generate training opportunities and opportunities to engage with the regional data lead network in the work that we're doing through this grant. Shelby, you can go ahead and skip ahead one more time. We were awarded this grant in March. We'll receive over the course of 4 years, roughly $3.25 million. And it's important to note, just as a sort of technical detail, these funds, there will not be subgrantees. The funds don't go out. What the funds do is help support us in the state and you all in building upon the great work that's already being done around data use in Ohio. That was a sort of a recurring theme throughout our grant application. I'm going to talk about 4 different projects that we'll be doing through this grant, but a recurring theme is that we didn't want to necessarily start something new. We recognize that there's a lot of great work already happening in Ohio, and we wanted to build upon that and accelerate that work. So that's the common theme throughout. Second common theme throughout is that we want to use this data, this grant, the grant and the data that comes from this grant and the tools that come from this grant to support equity in Ohio. Equity is one of our 3 core principles in Ohio's strategic plan. And so when we saw that that was a priority area within the grant RFP, again, we felt like that really resonated with us and where Ohio is right now in terms of using data. And then a third theme throughout, and this really ties nicely into what Paulo referenced earlier, is that we wanted to make sure we were building in connections to the regional data lead network, not just in the project that is really specifically relevant to the regional data lead network that we'll talk about later, but also throughout all of the projects. As Paulo said, we really value your feedback and the work that you are doing. And so for each one of these projects that we talk about today, we were thinking about how we could connect it with the work that you're doing, how we can create opportunities for you to learn and be trained on the tools and the data sources that we're going to be building upon, but also to hear from you about how we can do this well. We are not going to we don't want to just build something and put it out there and hope for the best. We really want to create something that's going to be useful for districts and useful for you as you're supporting districts. And so throughout each project, we have built in opportunities to get feedback from you in terms of how we're designing things. Are we thinking about this the right way? Are the products that we're producing going to be useful for you? Do they make sense? So I say all that to kind of reiterate what you've heard already. We value you and view you as really critical partners in this work. All of us here really, and myself included, really believe in the power of data for school improvement and improving student outcomes. And in Ohio, we're really blessed to have a wealth of information and resources and people who are dedicated to this work. So we want to capitalize upon that. All right, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes going through each of the 4 projects within the SLDS, Ohio's SLDS grant. And as I said, each of these are designed to build upon work that was sort of already underway that we wanted to accelerate and improve upon. And sort of a recurring theme throughout, or a tagline, I guess I should say, that I always had in mind as we were working on this grant was sort of, we want to bring together the right data, the right tools, and the right people to use these tools, the right training. So our very first project is around linking K12 and workforce data. In our strategic plan, we outline a single goal, and that is to increase our high school students, the number of our high school students who then go on to enroll in some sort of post-secondary training, post-secondary education of some sorts, who go on to earn a living wage, who enlist in the military, or who are otherwise engaged in sort of a self-sustaining vocation. And we've made a lot of inroads in a number of those outcome areas. One that we have been working towards for a number of years is this linkage between K12 and workforce data. It's a challenging one for every state. And in Ohio, it's been a little bit challenging just because these data elements are in different data systems, not just at local levels, but also at the state level as well. But this is a really exciting time, and it feels like the time is right to make this happen. There are new technologies, new innovations, and new collaborations in place now that are going to allow us to make this link at the state level for the first time. And this is going to help us, one, better understand where we are starting out with our strategic plan's one goal. But beyond that, beyond just knowing what's happening with our students as they leave our K-12 system, it's going to help us start to think about what are we doing at the K-12 level that can better prepare students for going on and entering the workforce. So as we make this link, the doors are going to open to a lot of really interesting analyses that we've not been able to do in the past. That's true at the state level, but that's also true at the local level as you are all thinking about the kinds of conversations you're having with districts, and the way you're thinking about how to sort of evaluate and think about the different programs that we have at the K-12 level. This data point will represent something that we've not had consistently in the past. So it's a really exciting sort of breakthrough. And we'll be working very closely with the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, as well as the Ohio Education Research Center, to help make this happen. So I'm excited to share that. And again, as I said, we're going to be talking with you all about, once we make this link, again, going back to the new sort of SLDS focus, once we make this link, having data is a great thing. Making use of the data, though, is really the ultimate goal. And finding ways to incorporate it into our systems of continuous improvement is really the goal, so that we can use it to improve student outcomes. All right, Shelby, you can go head on to the next one. Thank you. Our next project is going to be about enhancing our existing equitable access analysis tool. Many of you may have worked with your school districts in the past as they're putting together their local equity plans. Just to say a few brief words about those local equity plans. Essentially, districts use the equitable analysis data tool, the existing one, to better understand their students' access to high quality teachers and educators. And so currently every fall we put out a spreadsheet for districts to look at, and it helps them understand the percent of their economically disadvantaged and percent of their minority students who have access to, who are being taught by ineffective teachers, ineffective principals, inexperienced teachers, out-of-field teachers, and highly effective teachers. And this is a resource that they can use then to help develop their local equity plans. And so when we decided to pursue the priority area of equity, we knew we wanted to do something with this tool because it is already a great resource, but we see a lot of opportunity to build upon it. And the way that we're going to do that, there are a couple things that we want to do with this tool. The first is that we want to create a web-based, far more interactive tool. Right now, districts receive Excel spreadsheets that allow them to do some, manipulation of the data. You can do some great analyses with those spreadsheets. But in the future, what we'd like to be able to allow people to do is to do drill downs to teacher level and student level data, to do analyses within the web-based tool itself, and to just have a little bit more flexibility in how they're looking at the data through this tool. Additionally, we want to add some new measures to the tool to help us better understand students' access to high-quality teachers. And so while we haven't, I wouldn't say we've completely landed on exactly what those measures are going to look like. Again, this is an area where we want to make sure we're getting feedback from you all and from others who are using this data before we finalize those measures. What some of the things that we have in mind are expanding the tool to look at, specifically look at students with disabilities and look at students, English learner students, to better understand their access to high quality educators. We also want to look at some measures like the percent of students of color who have access to teachers of color. And we also want to build the tool so that you can run comparisons with similar districts to kind of better understand how things are playing out within your own schools and districts, and perhaps also look for other partners to talk to about this work, and to network with and learn from and engage with. So those are some of our the initial ideas that we wrote into the grant in terms of how we'd like to improve upon this tool. But again, we want to make sure that we're reaching out and getting feedback. Additionally, another connection to the regional data leads, very specific one, is that we wrote into the grant that as we develop this tool, we'll continue our staff will continue to offer training opportunities and information about these tools to districts and others. But we also really want to make sure that we have some targeted training for regional data leads so that when this tool comes out, you all feel prepared to talk about it and to use it with your districts that you're supporting. All right, we can go on to project number 3. Project number 3 is another, it's a data tool, but it's also in some ways creating some new information. And this project, there's actually sort of 2 reports that we'd like to create under this project. We were thinking about the information that districts, educators need to prepare their students for post-secondary success. And we know that there's sort of 2 areas where a lot of districts will, where there's information about students that can be really valuable for districts. And so what we want to do here is first leverage an existing tool that we have, ODEX, which is, I always forget what that stands for, the Ohio District Data Exchange. I remember the acronym and not all the words all the time, but so many of you may be familiar with ODEX. It's a tool, a resource that we use frequently with districts through our current data exchange processes. So it's something that people are familiar with at this point. And what we want to do is use ODEX to build 2 new reports. One would be an early warning system. So many of our districts use early warning systems. The state has been piloting an early warning system in 4 districts over the last couple of years, and we've had just different experiences over the years working with early warning systems. What we're really aiming for here is to create a relatively simple early warning system that's based in research and make it available to all states, to all districts. Something that they will not have to pay for. It's available to them if they need, if they don't already have an early warning system that they're relying upon. And sorry, I'm also sort of following along in the chat here, and so I just saw Suzette's comment, and I'm excited to get to the next report. To talk a little bit about the next report. So I'm really excited about this early warning system concept. We're going to build this into ODEX so that everyone has access to it, and they can kind of start to understand which of their students are at risk of dropping out. We also want to make sure that we're really intentional about not just providing the data about who might be at risk, but then also developing resources and guidance and connections to things like the Evidence-Based Clearinghouse or other resources around evidence-based strategies for then helping those students, because that's really the big question. Again, we can create data points, but it is how we use those data points that really becomes important, and how do we support people in making use of them and in understanding what to do for their students once they learn some new information about those students. The second part of this project is a second report that we're creating that will, at an individual level, provide information about students' progress towards meeting the graduation requirements. And so districts, and again, this would be available to every school and district in Ohio because we'll be building it through ODEX. And the report will provide them with information at the district, school, and individual level about progress towards graduation requirements. And it will, the idea is there will be spreadsheets available. It could be available in spreadsheet form for those individuals who want to do some analytics with that data. There will also be a nice dashboard report created within the system so that as guidance counselors, for example, are looking at this information, they can very quickly come to understand how a student is doing, where they might need some additional supports as they work towards graduation and work towards achieving their post-secondary goals. As with the equitable access analysis tool, our intention is to make sure that we are, one, working with stakeholder groups such as yourselves to design this in a way that's going to be useful, but two, to offer training around this tool in advance so that when it is out there, you are all in a good position to be able to work with your districts to use this tool. And I see some comments in the chat too about access and access to ODEX or something like a dummy site. I think that's really great feedback. And that's exactly the kind of thing we want to be thinking about so that when this rolls out, you are all prepared to support districts. So thank you, Michael, for that comment. Okay. I'm actually going to now turn it over to my colleague, Allie D'Angelo, to talk about the fourth project, which is very explicitly tied to the Regional Data Lead Network. And Allie will talk to you a little bit about what we had in mind there.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everyone. I'm apparently echoing. Hang on. Okay. So outcome 4 of our statewide longitudinal data system grant is all about you guys. It's all about the regional data leads and the data network. What we want to do here, Heather talked to you about some new data tools that are being created through the grant. And then we know that we've got data tools that we already use as RDLs, such as value added. A lot of you are doing things with item analysis. I think you're going to hear today about some special ed data tools, and then the teacher evaluation. So what we are thinking is to create some training for all of you around these tools. We would do it in a way where we would, kind of like the trainings that happened over the last school year, we would do it, we would put out an RFP that we would co-design with a group of RDLs and ESC people to make sure that we are getting it right. And we would look to all of you to provide training kind of as we always do to each other. So that is one big part of that. Another part is looking at some sort of needs analysis of our customers as RDLs. What do educators need? It could be specific to these tools or just in general. So we're building that in. And then we also want to, the RDL network is very grassroots, and it's very cool because of that. And it's been an amazing example of what we can do with a grassroots effort. We want it to mature a little bit and grow up a little bit to formalize it. So part of that is looking at this idea of credentialing you all in different data tools and skills. Again, we would co-design this with you all, but the idea that, we have that map on our website of where all the RDLs are. It would be great if, when you click on somebody, it also says this person is credentialed or certified or whatever the word is in item analysis and the school equity tool, the equitable access tool, et cetera. So looking at doing something like that. So those are the main goals of that fourth outcome. Again, we will be bugging you guys a lot to co-design and be our stakeholders and help us network further and recruit additional stakeholders as we kind of design the next level of being RDLs. I think I'm turning it back to Heather.
Sorry, I was on mute every time. All right. All right. So that kind of wraps up our presentation on the statewide longitudinal data system grant, although it does not wrap up our conversations moving forward. As we've sort of hopefully have conveyed to you, you'll be hearing a lot more about all of this as all this work starts to unfold. And I'm excited to work with you all on making these powerful tools for Ohio's educators and students. But before I conclude, I did also want to, before I conclude and before we get to any questions and other comments in the chat box, I did also want to share with you one more opportunity that is upcoming. As we kind of alluded to earlier, we are trying to be very intentional about creating connections across projects that the department is engaged with and with the Regional Data Lead Network. And so many of you might be familiar with some of the work that Ohio is doing with Proving Ground, which is an initiative out of Harvard University Center for Education Policy Research that works with districts to use data in a continuous improvement cycle. And they help districts look at their data to carry out needs assessments, develop interventions, and then test those interventions in a rapid cycle process. And right now they're working with a number of districts in Ohio to address chronic absenteeism. And so what this looks like is there's a lot of support for those districts in terms of looking at the data, developing an intervention. And then the wonderful thing is that these districts don't have to wait for a year or two to find out if those interventions worked, but rather they will do a rapid cycle analysis and understand within a matter of 6 to 8 weeks whether or not they're seeing the positive outcomes that they had hoped for, and then they can tweak the intervention. So this has been some exciting work in Ohio, and we're looking, I can tell you that we are looking really closely at ways we can create opportunities for collaboration between Proving Ground and the Regional Data Lead Network. Some of those are longer term opportunities that we're working through, but in the meantime, where we see opportunities to connect with you all, we want to take advantage of those. And one such opportunity is coming up tentatively in June. During the school building closure period, Proving Ground sort of shifted fairly quickly to say to their districts, is there anything that you need help with right now that we can help you with? Not just dealing with chronic absenteeism, especially in light of the fact that attendance is we're thinking differently about that now. But what else can we help you with right now? And so they've had an opportunity to start doing some analytics around based on data pulled from some remote learning platforms, and to start to look at that to see how that data might be helpful for districts as they think about supporting their students, not just now during the school building closure period, but really into the future as well. And so what we asked them to do, and what they very willingly agreed to do, is to start sharing out some of what they've learned with you all. And so in June, we're going to be hosting a webinar with Proving Ground so that they can share some of the analytical work that they're doing with the data from those remote learning platforms, and talk a little bit about how they've been using that with their partner districts to help improve the work that they are doing. So stay tuned for more information. My hope is that this will be valuable for you as you think about the different kinds of data that we can make use of. As we've kind of referenced a couple times here today, we're not going to necessarily have some of the state data that we've had in the past from FY20. But what I've found is that that's really gotten people thinking creatively about other data points that we can leverage to help support our students. So I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up about that coming soon, and we'll be sure to share out information as soon as possible about when that will happen. So I believe we still have some time for any questions, and you can enter those questions in the chat box. So I'm going to take a look here and see what questions we might be able to answer here. Go ahead and enter additional questions into the chat box, and we'll answer as many as we can this morning before shifting to the next presentation. And if there are some that we don't get to, we'll be sure to follow up either later today or via email to others. So let's see if we go back up here. I see Stan asked a question about linking this data system. Can we find a way to link this data system directly to the school, teacher, student information systems, and gradebook? Stan, I believe that you asked this question while we were talking about the linkage to workforce data. And if I'm wrong about that, my apologies, but I believe it was in reference to the K12 workforce linkage. And if I sort of broaden that to think about the other post-secondary outcomes as well, I think I'm not entirely sure if you're asking if for us to sort of provide back down to districts through the student information systems these post-secondary outcomes data, or if you're asking if we're sort of pulling directly from those systems to help inform the development of these linkages. If it's the former and you're asking about how we push that information back down, that's a great question. To be honest, I don't know all of the logistical details about how that might work, but I will take that back to our information technology office and start exploring what that might look like. What I can say is that we do want to make information available to districts in a way that's going to be helpful. And so even if it's not like a direct link, the degree to which we can share back information in some way so that districts are able to use that information, we will certainly be exploring those opportunities because we want you all to be using this data and also, for transparency purposes so that you understand sort of the information that we're seeing as well. There's also uses for this data for federal reporting. There's any number of reasons why we sort of recognize that this data is not just helpful for the state level, but for districts and educators as well. Okay, and I see. Okay, Christy, thank you for your comments about the equitable access analysis tool being great for an OPES next steps. That's great. And I love your comment about sort of integrating this data within systems to drive plans, supports decision making. I think that's exactly right. We don't want data use to be some separate step that educators are taking or districts are taking that is somehow separate from their broader plans. But the more we can find ways to integrate this so that it becomes a natural part of the conversations that are being had, that's a great, excellent point. Cool visual, I see Suzette commented on a cool visual tool for kids to help keep track. Yes, we are pro cool visual tools and good data visualizations that will help people make sense of the information. So we'll be sure to reach out to you all to help us think about what those visuals should look like to make this data meaningful. Let's see, something for RTL. Okay. I'm just reading through here. And then Julie asked if there was a timeline. And Julie, I don't know if you were asking that specifically in relationship to the RTL training projects that Allie talked about, or if it was in reference to a different project that we described. But I think that yeah, that must have popped up while Allie was talking a little bit about the training. Allie, do you want to take that question?
Sure. We are working on timelines now. And kind of the way we have envisioned it is that perhaps in the fall sometime we would be looking to put an RFP out to do the training. So over the summer, we would want to do some of that co-designing. And then obviously the training for the new tools is dependent on the development of the new tools. So that would all be happening, as those are developed. And Heather, do you want to talk just in general about the timeline of the grant?
Yeah, sure. It is a 4-year grant that started in March of this year. And so some of these projects will take a little bit longer than others. But in general, they will unfold over the course of the next 4 years. The K12 workforce linkage is probably the one that will happen most quickly. The tool development work is going to take a little bit longer. I also see a lot of comments about just in general the creation of dummy sites. And so I just want to acknowledge those comments and appreciate that point of feedback and sort of note that I see you all saying, it's not just that we want to be trained on some of these tools, but that we talked about here today, but just in general, being able to either access those tools in some way or have access to a dummy site so that you can see exactly what educators and districts are seeing. I can completely appreciate how that would put you in a better position to talk to them about those tools and help them use them. So that's a really great point of feedback, and I appreciate you all raising it. We'll certainly take that back to our internal team to think about how we might be able to work on meeting that need, not just with the SLDS projects, but with the other data systems that you've called out here as well. All right. I think we addressed the questions and comments. Certainly, if you have others, either now or throughout the day, feel free to note them in the chat box. And we have a lot of staff who are paying close attention to those. And we're going to do our best to get those answered as quickly as possible. If you have thoughts, additional thoughts, not just questions, but additional points of feedback or thoughts that you want to share with us, please feel free to do so. And feel free to reach out with additional questions. Again, I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you about this today, and I'm excited to work with you more as this all unfolds. And now I'm going to turn it over to Shelby to continue on the program for this morning.
All right. Good morning. This remote is having me very appreciative for the staff support when we're in the office. I've got several screens and muting and unmuting and slides, so bear with me here, but thank you so much, Heather and Allie, for sharing with us about the SLDS grant, and Paulo and Chris for kicking us off this morning. So I did just want to let you know, so let's see here, next slide. So later this afternoon, we are going to hear more from our Deputy State Superintendent, Dr. John Richard. He is going to be talking about the Reset, Restart education work that's happening with the department, with district leaders, education stakeholders. So we'll hear more about that at this afternoon session, but I also wanted to remind you and make sure you had access to that website where the department has all of our informational documentation about COVID-19 impacts to reporting or programs, what districts and schools are working through, and how the department is working to support and address a lot of those changes. So you can head to the website that's linked here in the slide deck. If you just go to education.ohio.gov, there's a big highlighted page. You can just click on that and it'll take you right to all of those informational resources right in one place. And I also wanted to then actually hand off to Chris to share about some other resources that the department is working on. And so I will let him do that, and then we'll go back to reminders for the day.
Sure. Thanks, Shelby. One thing that I wanted to sort of tee up with this group to be thinking about throughout the day and also after we leave here today is that when we go into sort of this, reset, restart work, and John will give some more kind of big picture details on this, but one of the clear needs is sort of we're even still sort of working on the right terminology for it, but sort of meeting students where they are, right? Being able to gauge where students are at academically when things start back up in whatever our new normal looks like. And obviously, we're not going to have, state test results from this year, but having an understanding of where students are is really, really crucial. And I think you're starting to see a lot of that in the national landscape. I think people recognize that, but then sort of drilling down and being much more specific about, well, what exactly does that mean? And what are the types of tools and resources that educators are going to need to be able to do that? I think a lot of systems are sort of well versed and have high functioning assessment systems and have plans in place. I'm not sure that everybody necessarily does that. And so some of the things that that we've been thinking about at the department are things like, well, putting together some gap analysis tools that I know that our curriculum and instruction folks have been looking at to help teachers sort of think through, which standards have been covered before the closure, what standards were sort of covered during the remote learning. We've been trying to think through how to link that up with some assessment resources. So, for example, we have a pretty large inventory of high quality released test items. And so while the state is not going to be requiring state testing by any means, we do have lots of really good quality things that might be able to inform that conversation. And I know that some of our team has some of the people on this call have been involved in some of those conversations, and we want to get more feedback. And I think sort of the question is sort of like, what are the things, what are the tools, what can we be putting together to help with that conversation? If the idea is to sort of help educators think about where students are and have some data informed conversation about that, what are the things that we can be doing to help with that process? And so I sort of tee that up as a key question, sort of a key challenge into responding to this crisis. We've been thinking through some things again with our curriculum folks and with some of the assessment resources that we have, and we will definitely be sharing those for feedback. But those are things I think we definitely want to continue to think through and respond to. So thanks for that. That was sort of an unplanned part of our script, Shelby. So thanks for that. I'm going to kick it back to Shelby.
No problem. And I do see Julie has a question there. Is it possible that ODE might release additional Ohio State test items?
Well, I think that's a part of it, sort of thinking through how to leverage a lot of the things that are released. So I think we've got a lot of things out there that are in certain formats, whether, right now they're sort of like in a student practice test. But one of the ways we're trying to think through that is trying to bundle those differently and make the things that a lot of the things that we have available. So I think those are a lot of the ideas that are on the table.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Okay, we are a little bit ahead of schedule, but I am never one to keep folks in a meeting unnecessarily. So I will wrap up here with just looking ahead to the rest of our day. So we're heading into a break right now, which will turn into a 30-minute break for everybody. We'll return at 10:30 with a session facilitated by our Regional Data Lead Steering Committee. So I'm really excited to have them share their expertise, and we'll also be giving some information about ways to continue engaging with the network, committee opportunities, and updates from all of our committee leads. So we're looking forward to that session, which is next. Again, that's at 10:30. So logistical reminders for folks who have maybe gotten too many emails from me and have stopped reading them, which is perfectly fine. Each session has its own link. So just a reminder that you'll log out of this session for your break, and then there's a new link or call-in information that you will join for the session at 10:30. Then we'll go ahead, 11:45 is that lunch, walk, step away from the computer break. That'll be a little bit longer. We have our 2 breakout sessions in the afternoon, followed by that wrap-up session that'll be at 2:30. And that is going to be where Dr. John Richards is going to join us. We'll do some reflection on the day, Q&A for the department and for RDLs on the call, and also hear from John about that reset, restart with education. So thank you again to everyone for joining in already this morning. We are so excited that the day is finally here. Again, thank you to Heather, Allie, Chris, and Paulo for kicking us off. We will keep this session open just a little bit longer with Brittany and Will, our support team for the day, just in case you have questions about the technology. But other than that, step away from the computer, get a good stretch in, grab some more coffee, and we will see you all back here at 10:30 for our next session. Thanks, everybody.